boys and girls, and I guess they, am I saying that right, you kids? This is Women Wrestlers You Should Know in commemoration of Women's History Month. It's being brought to you ad-free and commercial-free by Premier Pro Wrestling. I'm Randy Ritchie, and today we're doing Mildred Burke, and I learned so many things myself that are pertinent today reading up on Mildred Burke. So bear with me. This one's probably going to be a long one, and I am going to put as much pertinent information as I can in the description so more people understand how instrumental the Queen of the Ring, Mildred Burke, was. Editor's note: in 1990, legendary sports writer Frank DeFord contributed a Mildred Burke feature for an edition of the Wrestling Observer Yearbook, so I guess I should read that too. This Frank DeFord is a hell of a writer, by the way. Wrestling with the Devil. Mildred Burke created a sport and became its greatest champion, all in spite of the man, her husband, who was trying to destroy her. Wrestling is one of its cyclical boom periods now. Wrestling is in one of its cyclical boom periods now. But there are almost no women's bouts in America. The women in wrestling here are managers, handmaidens, and showpieces with cleavage. They themselves don't wrestle, but when professional wrestling was first in its heyday, a ladies' match was common on most bills. There was, however, only one champion, Mildred Burke, and there was only one women's wrestling promoter, Billy Wolfe. Together they created a sport. Mildred was sweet and naive. Billy was an ugly satire. Mildred and Billy were also married to each other. They despised each other, but they needed each other desperately. She first saw Billy Wolfe one hellish hot summer's day in 1932 on True Street in Kansas City, Missouri. The Depression lay upon the dusty land, and even good Americans were finding it harder and harder to believe in tomorrow. Mildred Bliss, what a great name, was growing desperate. She had left school at 15. When her boss attacked her, she quit, even scarce as jobs were. Somewhat later, she landed a job as a waitress on an Indian reservation in New Mexico. When an old boyfriend came through on his way to California, she left with him. I would have married anyone to get off that reservation, Millie said. But they couldn't cut it, not even in California, and Millie and her husband ended up back in KC. That was where she saw her first wrestling match, the old Midway Arena. There was something like 1,500 fans on hand. Maybe 3 or 4 of them were women. It was one dandy show. Wrestling was already changing from pure contest to a mix of athletics and theater. The tribute with real wrestling was that it was too easy for the best wrestlers to counter each other, to wrestle defensively. As a consequence, the best technical matches were as often as not the most boring. The sport was dying at the gate with these athletic contests that were known as in the trade as shooting matches. So they were being replaced by working matches where style counted more than substance. Well, it's entertainment. Mildred had never seen any kind of wrestling before, but she was almost mystically captivated by it. She would even come to think that she was so instinctive a wrestler that it must have been innate, that she reincarnated from some ancient male wrestler or something. It was eerie. But then, at that time, 1932, she couldn't dwell on any of it. The husband she didn't love had left her, which wouldn't have been so bad, except that he left her pregnant. Luckily, Millie's mother came back to Kansas City and opened Mom's Cafe on True Street, serving full home-cooked meals for clientele that scraped up 2 bits for the dinner, and Millie got a job slinging hash at Mom's. Something else, huh? That was when she saw Billy Wolfe, the erstwhile middleweight wrestling champion of Missouri. Even 7 months pregnant, Millie was cute. petite. She stood only 5'2" and in her prime weighed no more than 138. Wolf, who leered at almost anything in a skirt, leered at her legs. He was 20 years older than Millie, twice her age. She found him nearly repulsive, gnarled, blocky, with cauliflower ears, sinister eyes between those horn-rimmed glasses, with a cigar stuck in a chubby, gap-toothed mouth that brought to mind a jack-o'-lantern. But right away, Millie saw the old wrestler as a way out of Mom's cafe. Shortly after she gave birth to a son, Joe, Millie began to beg Billy for a chance to try wrestling. In his usual charm-laden way, he would snort and reply, You ain't no bigger than a pint of piss. Charmer, huh? But Millie persisted. So one day, he took her over to his gym, which was a few blocks away, up over a garage. She put Joe in his bassinet, the baby, down by the ring and changed into a Gertrude Aduro bathing suit and boys' high-top sneakers. She came out to find her opponent, a gypsy boy, a head taller and 20 pounds heavier. Wolf had promised the gypsy $2 with a little extra if he whipped Millie decisively, so as soon as the gong rang, he tore across the ring, lifted the startled mother up over his head, whirled her around in an airplane spin, and started to fling her to the canvas. But here came the instinct, the reincarnation business. Somehow Millie twisted in his grasp, dropped to the ring on her feet, tripped the surprised opponent, and pinned him in a flash. Something else, huh? Now you know why I'm reading this. When Wolf demanded a replay, Millie sprang at the gypsy and, aping his moves, picked him up, spun him and flung him and pinned him. Billy Wolf was beside himself. He came up with a plan pronto. He would take the girl off to join the Landis shows, put her on the midway, and have her take on all male comers. Millie was thrilled at this prospect for excitement and employment. God bless her, huh? She told her mother to sell Mom's cafe and head back to California. Then she and Joe piled into Billy's old Ford and took off with him to Abilene, where they would get hitched and go into show business. It was along the road when he asked her to hand over her share of the $200 they had gotten from Mom's cafe. Millie told him that since she wasn't going to work now, with a husband to support her to boot, she had let her mother keep it all. Sounds fair to me, huh, folks? Especially for the time. Check this out. Here's where it gets real dark. Billy Wolf screamed at her and drew back his hand to wallop her. His eyes glinted savagely, and spittle foamed at his snarled lips. Millie cowered by the car floor, protecting her baby. Billy shrieked that she was so stupid he wouldn't marry her after all. In fact, he said he might just turn her into the police and take her baby. That was because, he explained, she was a married woman who had just crossed state line with a man other than her husband. So she was liable to jail and the forfeiture of her child. This was, of course, nonsense, and indeed, Wolf himself might have been liable to prosecution under the Mann Act. Millie was still only 19. She believed him and began to live in his thrall. Man, this guy's a great writer, isn't he? I don't have $1 to my name. I was completely in this man's power. The whole character of our relationship was set in that moment, she said many years later. She huddled over in the seat, holding baby Joe to her breast until, at last, they got to Abilene, where Millie Bliss could wrestle grown men for a living. God bless her. Talkies were coming in, and the richer folks in town had radio sets. But there were still scores of carnivals amusing America then, tempting midways of naked light bulbs, Ferris wheels, hurdy-gurdy music, candy apples, lemonade, games of skill for unskilled rubes, and freak shows. The fat woman, dwarfs and giants, the tattooed man, the dog-faced boy, the top acts were the carnies called concerts, which meant you could charge the hicks extra. Hermaphrodites, for best example, were classic concerts. Bears that danced with another one in a line, and the two-headed child was always good for another nickel, even if it turned out to be a barely formed fetus in a murky bottle. Times sure were different, folks. But caveat emptor, I don't know what the hell that means. Carnies were the bottom of the barrel, free white and 21 division. Most towns wouldn't even let the carnival employees off the premises. Drifters and scoundrels, scamps, runaways. It was a raw life on the move in a pinch time, and everybody was fair game. Yeah, well, that's what happens when things are bad, right? Like we're talking about the Depression here. Carnies called their rookies the 1st of May, dating back to a pre-Sunbelt age when most road shows didn't get along till spring. A newcomer, you see, was so green he was the 1st of May. But by that standard, Millie Bliss was about March 24th, a novice of novices. Wolf gave her only a handful of brief workouts before he threw her to the crowds. Hurry, hurry, hurry. $25 to anyone who can beat the little lady in 10 minutes, pin or submission. Nice, huh? $25 was uptown cash then. Wolf predicted opposition those no more than a head or so larger than Millie. Nice guy. We accept your challenge, he would scream in the first-person plural, not because he cared about her well-being, but because he didn't want to take too many chances with the $25. In her spare time, Wolf had her train other female wrestlers. Ostensibly, this was going to provide Millie with intergender competition, which she dreamed of. But in fact, it was because Wolf saw a good thing and he wanted to replace Millie with another, more pliant wrestler. Also, he seduced Millie's pretenders, her students, as she would her competitors all their marriage. And that's why they eventually got divorced, but we'll get there. The first time I talked to Billy, says Beck Carter, a wrestler who was a teenager, 1/3 of his age, when she first met the promoter, he said to me, I got 2 questions for you. Are you a lesbian? And if you're not, will you sleep with me? That was all, just like that. I'm not a lesbian, but I said it's none of your business. And second, no, I won't. It didn't bother Billy. He just shrugged off and said, okay, then you'll never get to be champion. Billy Wolf was the daddy of us all, but he was a terrible bully. He loved to pit girls against each other outside the ring. He loved to see girls fighting. Nice guy, huh? Sick bastard. One day on the carnival, when Mildred was working with the belly board, hustling tickets for the evening show, Billy was back in the trailer carrying on with one of his women. Baby Joey woke up and started crying, ruining the mood for the lovers. So Wolf pummeled the poor child, leaving his little body a mass of bruises and welts, and then Millie came home and found Joey. She immediately packed her valise and took off down the road, hitchhiking with Joey. The first man who picked her up pulled over and tried to rape her. And even though she escaped, she had no place left to go. My God. She begged Wolf to come get her, but at least she laid it on the line to him about the child. Billy, she said straight up, if you ever touch Joey again, I'll wait till you're asleep and then I'll cut your head off your body. Whatever may have existed of an intimate relationship, even of a convenience, had long vanished. Not even Joe Wolf can ever recall a single affectionate moment between Mildred and Billy. But she thought she needed him, and she kept proving that he did need her. Billy was a powerful personality, Joe Wolf said. But in wrestling, without Mildred Burke, Billy was nothing. Night after night, the grimy young men of the Midwest would step forward to take her on. She was Mildred Burke now, a name that had come to Wolf one night out of the blue as he worked with Bally. Bliss was no name for a wrestler. Burke, Mildred Burke, and the toughs would step forward. We accept your challenge. Then they would stride into the ring, and Mildred Burke would turn them upside down and show them up, pin them, or hold them at bay. 2 years, she never lost a Carney match. The men in the audience screaming at the action, gasping at the titillation, the cute little woman in tights squirming against the men, one after another. Billy Wolf's athletic show was a hit. Night after night, the dazzle of the Midway. Then Millie hurt her knee, and Billy told her to hit the road just like that. She pleaded with him, tears rolling down her cheeks. She begged. At least he agreed. All right, temporarily, he said. Get this, he would allow Millie to stay till she trained another woman to replace her in the act. She was reprieved. She could still work on her dream of being an athlete, not a carny. And one day, when miraculously her knee popped back into its socket while she was training her replacement, she began to look seriously beyond the Midway. Somewhere out there had to be other ladies who wanted to wrestle. First, though, Miller wrote letters to the newspapers in the smaller towns all over the Midwest, offering the standard $25 to any man her size who could beat her in his hometown. One fellow, a dishwasher in Bethany, Missouri, who was earning $5 a week, answered the challenge. The match filled the hall in Bethany. Millie whipped him and was on her way. Soon, she was wrestling men all over. Billy couldn't believe it. It was the same scam as the carnivals, but the stakes were much higher. He was, in fact, so pleased with these expanding prospects that he finally made an honest woman out of Millie. They were joined in holy matrimony, Mr. and Mrs. Billy Wolf. Can you imagine being married to somebody that you'd been with that long and already knew what they were about and hated them? My God. Soon she was... Okay, I read that already, so bear with me. What a dirtbag. Her renown was spreading, and at last, other women, penniless in the Depression, able to find traditional work, began to imitate Millie. You got to understand, says Mae Young, a longtime rival, who first wrestled Millie in 1940 in Tulsa. If it hadn't been for Mildred Burke, there wouldn't have been any female wrestling ever. Down south, one Cora Jurgens began making a name for herself in the ring against men. She was well represented by several large, sharp men in wingtip shoes, and they possessed the foresight Mildred had, and Billy didn't. They proposed a match between Cora and Mildred for the Ladies Wrestling World Championship. There was real money promised, so we accept your challenge. Only when Millie and Billy got to Birmingham, they found out there was a fly in the ointment. The fix was in for the hometown queen. When Millie protested, 4 goons worked Billy over, so Millie lost. This is why they had athletic commissions back then, folks. This was the inception of it. But the show was critical and financial success, and Billy convinced Millie to replay it all over Dixie. She would almost pin Cora, and then she would let Cora escape and Cora would win. The fans went wow. Finally, though, Millie got Cora to agree to a shooting match. It was set for Chattanooga only. Wouldn't you know it? Cora's men in the wingtip shoes brought the ref, and when Millie put Cora away, the ref jumped in and said Millie had used an illegal hold and raised Cora's hand in victory. What was that about the Montreal screw job? Please. But the people could smell a rat. They weren't born yesterday in Chattanooga, Tennessee. The arena went up for grabs. The fans poured into the ring and hoisted Millie onto their shoulders and forced judges to give her the brand spanking new championship belt. But that wasn't satisfaction enough for Millie. She spotted Cora sneaking back into a dressing room and chased after her. Millie remembered it like this. Cora cowered over near the shower. So I went over to her, and right there with no spectators and no payment, I beat the living daylights out of her. Man, what a tough lady. Then Millie shook her finger at the sniveling would-be. That'll teach you to pull double cross on me, she said. Cora just sobbed some more. So who's the champion? You are, Millie, Cora gasped. You are the champion. And so she was. The money began to roll in. Mildred Burke estimated that she made in excess of, $4 million in her career. $50,000 in 1938, when the average Major League ball player was pulling down approximately $6,000. Millie was making six figures 2 decades before the world celebrated Billie Jean King as the first six-figure-a-year female athlete. Billie had to set up a fancy booking office in Columbus, Ohio, where he could sleep with his women and spend Millie's money. She was on the road wrestling night after night, 6 nights most weeks, in cities that were sometimes hundreds of miles apart. Mostly, she would leave right after the night's match, sleeping in the car by the side of the road when she wasn't at the wheel. She put 100,000 miles and more onto a new Buick every year, and there were no interstates then. There was no automobile air conditioning then either, and automobile heaters were not reliable. Her knees ached a lot of the time, her nose was broken, and an opponent stopped on her mouth once, causing $3,000 worth of dental work. Both of her thumbs were ripped out of their joints and pushed back into her wrists. It was not glamorous. And it was even worse during the war. When the rubber and the engines went out to fight the enemy, and a lot of the time she had to ride buses standing up for the soldiers. But when Mildred Burke, the wrestling queen, world champion, lady wrestler, got to the arena, there she was transformed. She wore the most gorgeous attire. Remember, this was the Depression. This was when most everybody had nothing, and the movies were all escapist drawing room comedies and lavish musicals where men in top hats and tails waltzed with women slinky in their silk and sequins, and Mildred too. Her gowns, furs, $60 sneakers, matching wrestling suits and robes, ermine trimmed, while one robe weighed 20 pounds with all the rhinestones. Billie brought her diamonds, to boot hairpins and tiaras, watches, and a necklace. Let's see here. She was also in the newspapers. Mildred Burke is in town. Newsreels. A lot of men took a shine to her. United States Senator John Bricker was very sweet on her. She was not attractive, not in the least. Sometimes the satin suit she had wrestled in had cutout size with lots of skin for her own publicity photos. Millie posed in even more daring cheesecake-necked and high heels with only furs or towels hiding her charms. Millie was what was called a pin-up then. And now, ladies and gentlemen, the undefeated ladies wrestling champion, the one and only Mildred Burke. The spotlight, rhinestones, and ermine, the crowd cheering. The music was an instrumental known as the Saber Dance. It was her anthem. Saber Dance went bop, 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 whatever the hell, it doesn't matter. It was terribly distinct, the Saber Dance. Some of you old-timers might know it, man. I don't have the patience for it, but I am losing my mind over how great this woman was. Then Millie would come to the ring, strip down to her suit, and parade about. She was tremendously strong. At the height of her powers, the Los Angeles Police Department displayed her poster in the precincts trying to shame the male cops into getting into better shape. Now that's a ball buster if I ever heard one. Invariably, her opponent was larger. Millie won with leverage, dexterity, and cunning. Most of her matches she concluded with a world-famous alligator clutch, which involved twisting her opponent this way and then sitting on her to best effect. This is just unbelievable to me. The way Billy Wolf figured lady wrestling was here to stay, and if he could just dethrone Mildred one way or the other, this is his wife, folks, and control her, conqueror, he would be better for it. With this mindset, he tried everything for shame, to trickery, to murder. Now listen to this, it gets even worse. He killed her dog once. He spread his story that she was dying of cancer, so no one should book her anymore. Regularly, when Millie was injured or under the weather, he would suddenly order one of the enamorates to try and beat her shooting when they were only supposed to be working. In restaurants and public places, Billy loved to cry out loud, "Mildred Burke is so dumb, she'd work if I threw her a fish." Once he sicked a lesbian wrestler on her in their motel room and laughed diabolically as Millie tried to escape. He blatantly slept with her opponents, and he took a special delight in deriding her small breasts, comparing them to other wrestlers, especially to Nell Stewart, his favorite. Isn't that great, guys? Millie was convinced that Billy tried to have her drowned once and killed on 3 occasions in car accidents with automobile parts that suspiciously failed. And of course, he would beat her. One time outside a liquor store in Los Angeles, Billy and another large 200-pound man pummeled her up against her car. As Millie remembered it, "Only my devotion to training and my washboard ab muscle saved me from permanent injury. Punch slammed into my ribs and kidneys, my solar plexus and breasts. Bang, bang, bang went my head off the car roof as these 2 men kept cursing me, trying to knock me senseless. But they could not make me promise to lose to Nell Stewart. They could not make me give up my title." Jesus, this woman, huh? Billy could not understand that he was her only real opponent. He was her shooting match every day. Millie didn't wear a wedding band. On her 3rd finger left hand, she wore a large ring with a royal crown, like a nun who wears the ring to signify that she's married to the church. Mildred was married to Lady Wrestling. She had created it, and she would not let it go. Especially, she would not let her husband take it from her. Finally, after 2 decades, Jesus Christ, 20 years, folks, she did summon up the courage to divorce him, but even then she let Billy get the best of the settlement. Now listen to this. What she took was a lot of jewelry he had given her, and then she found out most of it wasn't worth anywhere near what she had thought. Oh, how much I envied the relationship other wives had with their regular, straight-ahead, and decent men, Mildred said. Through all those miserable years together, though, she only once seems to have fallen in love with another man, and the other man was this, like Shakespeare or like soap opera. The other man was Billy Wolf's only son. He was known as G. Bill Wolf to distinguish him from his father. He was 6 years younger than Millie, and his father sent him on the road with his stepmother when she finally asked for a chauffeur. Eventually, the awe G. Bill had for Millie grew into something else, and at least G. Bill got up the nerve to go to Billy and, in fact, ask him to give over his wife to his son. Billy was prepared. He already knew what was going on, and after watching Bill squirm, he fiendishly laughed in his son's face, mocking him, before he loosed a cascade of vile accusations against Millie. G. Bill began to weep. "Bill, you son of a bitch," Billy said, "you ain't never gonna get Mildred. Now me, I don't want her myself. Just what I can get out of her. But no one else is getting her. Now get the hell out of here." Nice, huh, guys? To rub it in, Billy took G. Bill away from Millie and made him become the driver for Nell Stewart, his mistress. Millie went back on the road by herself. Destiny and my own relentless ambition had shackled me to a dog in the manger. She wrote years later, a dog that grew progressively more vicious even as I filled his coffers with money. But she loved wrestling so much she could abide what her husband did to her. Only rarely did she let the whole thing get to me. One such night was in Atlanta before a match with Nell Stewart. As Millie recalled, Nell was pretty, no doubt of that, and all the promoters, just like Billy, were fond of her because of their big gates. She was sitting in the dressing room primping, and she took a long, special look at herself. Then she patted her ample bosom. "These are the real thing, Millie," she said. "Yeah, Nell, I know they're the real thing," I said, "and my husband knows they're the real thing. But what's important is what's under them. When your heart gets to be the real thing, you'll have something to brag about. Until then, if I were you, I would keep my mouth shut." I would have kept my mouth shut, really. This is an amazing read, isn't it, folks? I hope you guys can keep up with me. I hope I'm reading it well enough, and there's a reason I'm doing this. Just, wow. Nell sat there with her mouth open, her eyes wide, and her brassiere off, and 15 minutes later in the ring, I manicured the mat with Miss Stewart, throwing her around like a beanbag. "Nell," I said, "that's the real thing." Billy had her thinking that I was a complete idiot instead of a protector of the sport and the business that I loved. Huh. Unbelievable, this woman. Once Mildred Burke got things straightened out with Cora Jurgens in Chattanooga, she never lost another match shooting or working. All told in the ring, she won 150 matches against men, something like 5,000 matches against women in most states of the Union, Canada, Mexico, Japan, and Cuba. The band played Hail to the Chief for her when she landed in Havana. She retired undefeated, beating Ruth Boatcali in Reno in January of 1955. In her finale, when she was just short of her 40th birthday. Ruth had once blinded Millie in one eye with a fingernail. But even with that, she couldn't put her away. No one could physically beat Millie in the ring, Mae Young says, leaving it at that. Isn't that fucking outstanding that even Mae Young, you know? The last time Millie saw Billy and G. Bill, the two men in her wrestling life, was in Atlanta in '54, when she had a shooting match with June Byers. Millie's knee went out of its socket, but she shoved it back in and wrestled 47 minutes for real to keep the title. Thus, she foiled Billy to the end. By that time, though, G. Bill was drinking heavily and turned against her, no less than his father. That time, Billy and another man, damn it, beat up Millie outside the liquor store, and that other man was G. Bill. After Billy and Millie divorced, After Billy and Millie divorced, he married Nell Stewart. G. Bill married June Byers, but both couples were divorced by the time the two men died. Billy Wolfe in 1961, his son a year later. After she retired from the ring, Mildred Burke trained many female wrestlers, but there was never another one like her. Ladies wrestling peaked with her, and it has never been the same since Millie and Billy ran it in their fashion, working the crowd, shooting each other. Mildred Burke died 2 summers ago at the age of 73, bigger in her sport than anybody ever was in theirs. Now, this was written by, the real sports writer that I told you about for the Observer in 1990. So I'm sure a lot of things had changed. If you've hung in there this long, thanks for hanging in there. This is just an example of what we feel as Premier Pro Wrestling is important and important to commemorate. Of course, women's wrestling today is back to what it was back then, and it's amazing that it's happened, and one can't imagine that Mildred Burke is somewhere up there smiling down, If you listen to all this stuff and consider the times and consider what this woman did, and it started with tenacity at 19 years old, how could one not be impressed? The other things that I've heard are that she went to court. She actually spent so much money trying to buy her company or get the rights to her and her company and, the women's wrestling organization, period. She won in court, but because the NWA sanctioned wrestling after she spent all that time and thought she'd won something, well, Billy got to the NWA, and the NWA at that point wouldn't even let a woman come in and take a meeting in spite of Mildred's amazing star and drawing power and wrestling skill. Isn't that disgusting? But what finally ended up happening is, I guess somehow, some way, All Japan Wrestling or All Japan Women's Wrestling ended up buying it from Mildred. And that lended them credibility to do what they did with all the things that they did with the first rebirth of women's pro wrestling, which is legendary, and I wish that stuff was on video. I can't find it anywhere. If you guys can, please, let us know and leave it in the description below. Leave it in the message, I hope you guys have enjoyed this because I sure have. My eyes have really popped open. Mildred set out to do all these things for herself and for the wrestling, for women's wrestling, period. But in the process, I think she's also helped a lot of men in wrestling, and I just don't believe that any independent woman wrestler can call themselves a wrestler until they've studied up on Mildred Burke. I'm surprised the two people that I think that some companies should put a lot of money in to telling their stories on the silver screen, on the big screen, on the movies, in the movies, are Bruno Sammartino and Mildred Burke, because I bet you're going to see a lot of parallels between two people. Not only what they went through to reach the top of their sport, but also in life, just the fact that they were there in the first place after all they've been through, Amazing to me. Stuff like this really motivates me, and I am going to force the guys that were training at Premier Pro Wrestling to get to know this story and to get to know Mildred Burke. I used to hang out with, when I would go do televisions for WWE, Killer Kowalski and Arnold Skolin, who came in at the end of Mildred's run, and they used to love to tell me those old-timey stories, which I love to hear. Look here, kid, you see this backwards finger? He broke that to get out of a waist lock back in 1940, blah, blah, blah. Stuff like that. And I loved hearing it because there's so much that you could take from even back then and use today in the ring, and they call you innovative. And they pop because they've never seen that before, Mike Tyson, who humbly says he didn't invent the phrase, but lived by the phrase, to be great, you must study the greats. And it's rumored that Mike Tyson has more knowledge about the history of boxing than most active fighters today, including those that are ranked the top of the industry. All right, guys, I'm going to let you go now. Thanks for bearing with me and hanging in there. Again, this is Women Wrestlers You Should Know, and you heard it, in that writing, in my reading, that there wouldn't be a women's wrestling if it hadn't been for Mildred Burke. She took it out of the carnivals and made it a sport and pointed out and became undeniably one of the greatest wrestlers, man or woman, of all time. Remember, this has been brought to you without any YouTube commercials or ads. So please be cool, like and subscribe. And in the description, I'm going to put a handful of links, things that I find are pertinent to Mildred Burke. And also you can find ways to support Premier Pro Wrestling in the description as well. Thanks again.